Hello and welcome to the new edition of Counterpoint, the show that's unpacking the trends shaping our business. Today we're talking about Europe facing deglobalisation. Hello, Thomas Friedberger. You are the Deputy Chief Executive Officer of Tikehau Capital.
Hello, Rachel.
Now, since Europe is by far the most world trade dependent economic area, why then is the deglobalisation trend an opportunity for European growth? I mean, Thomas, if we talk about energy dependence on Russia, if we talk about some of the divisions that have been triggered by Brexit, some of the US pressure not to develop relations with China, aren't these vulnerability of Europe in this context of deglobalisation?
Well, seen that way, it's true that it's not obvious. It might sound a bit counterintuitive to talk about Europe as an investment opportunity. And in fact, globalization has helped the US and China to emerge or to confirm their domination as world leaders, in part because globalization has allowed them to leverage their very strong domestic market that has been a strong factor of profitability for the companies from those countries to address the globalized world, which has not been the case necessarily of Europe. It's true that when you are a national champion in one sector, it's difficult to do business in Germany, for example. When you are a Belgian champion, it's difficult to do business in France or in Italy. And so, because of this heterogeneous market, Europe has not benefited from globalization because of a weaker, I would say, domestic basis. Now, globalization has peaked as a percentage of GDP. Global trade has peaked in 2008, and this number has been decreasing since then. So there is really an inflection point. Today, globalization on the back of the COVID crisis and then the war in Ukraine means vulnerability to a lot of investors. Companies will need to build resilience. They will need to shorten supply chain. They will need to re-onshore production. And because this will have a cost, those companies will need to invest massively, so they will need to perform capital expenditure, what we call CapEx, in order to keep their competitive advantage, to remain competitive, and they will need to invest massively from that manner. And that could mark an inflection point in the weakness of Europe.
So the idea then would be ultimately to build up resilience. You've just made reference to it there, Thomas. I mean, what will it take? Because there's a lot to be done ultimately.
There's a lot, and ultimately it will necessitate a real industrial policy from Europe. The COVID crisis has triggered a massive support from governments, but which has been rather indifferentiated. And that's not only the case in Europe, it's also the case in the US, but in all the Western world, governments have spent about 20% of their GDP to support the economy in an indifferentiated way. This is not sustainable long term. And so it means probably in Europe the comeback of industrial policies, meaning that governments and the European Commission and the European bodies will have to make strong choices to choose in which sector they want to be among the best in the world. But the dynamic is there. I mean, if you look at the European sentiment, it has been reinforced massively, unfortunately, by the crisis in Ukraine.
Indeed.
Nationalist parties have been obliged to retrench and to review massively their rhetoric vis-à-vis Europe because of this improvement of the global European sentiment. Also, from a fiscal point of view, the fact that the European Commission is now issuing common bonds on the back of the COVID recovery plan is also a good sign. It's a premises probably of a true fiscal union, even though there is still a long way to go. And then European bodies like the European Investment Fund are starting to allocate capital with a very well, I would say, defined policy to favor certain sectors. And that's also probably the premises of a real industrial policy.
So from where you're standing, would a regionalisation of trade be feasible, and is it expected?
Yeah, it's feasible. I mean, Europe is a big market. It's the European Union is about 450 million people, so it's a very large market, larger than in the US. The area is stable politically. It is stable from a legal point of view. It's favorable to business. Also, this weakness of an heterogeneous domestic market is starting to improve, in part thanks to the emergence of private equity companies having allowed national champions to grow outside of their domestic market, for example, which is what we do on our side. I mean, we provide capital, but also we provide network, we provide expertise to allow national champions to become European champions. And so if we manage to do that well, it will probably address this issue, and it will create massive economic value for Europe.
I mean, if we think kind of to wrap things up, Thomas, about kind of investors and how they should leverage potential, what would you say?
I would say investors will probably be incentivized to allocate capital in sectors that are representing mega trends. So, and those mega trends probably are concentrated on areas where companies will need to invest to perform this capex. So, for example, energy efficiency of buildings, energy efficiency of plants, energy efficiency of truck fleets, for example. So, energy transition as a whole, cyber security, where everybody will need to invest in this sector. Industry 2.0, so digitalization of supply chains, of industrial processes. That's a way to remain competitive. In real estate, for example, transforming assets, so buying bad assets in great locations and transforming them with an impact, a social impact and an impact on the environment, positive. That's also a mega trend, providing special financings, hybrid capital to European companies. So there are a lot of mega trends in Europe that will probably be massive investment opportunities, and which also will correspond to where governments will incentivize investors to deploy capital through a real industrial policy. So that makes us very optimistic about Europe as an investment opportunity in the context of, I would say, an inflection point in globalization.
Well, on that optimistic note, Thomas, thanks very much for sharing your insight, your experience with us on the show today. For those of you who've been tuning in to a new episode of Counterpoint, we hope you'll join us again soon.